Hello and welcome to the Fuel, Run, Recover podcast, helping everyday runners fuel better, run smarter, and recover faster so you can reach your full performance potential. I'm your host, Stephanie Natchek, dietitian, fitness coach, and a fellow runner too. As the owner of Stephanie Natchek Performance Nutrition, I've spent the last 10 years helping runners learn to fuel their bodies, level up their running performance, and establish healthier relationships with food and exercise. If you're ready to reconnect with your love of running, then let's get started on today's episode. So hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Fuel, Run, Recover podcast, where I am so excited to be sitting down with Laura Moretti Reece. She is a fellow dietitian and is here to have a conversation all about relative energy deficiency in sport and bring us some amazing expertise on the topic and tell us all a little bit more about the 2023 IOC consensus statements, which, I've been really excited to have as a resource in my practice, and I'm sure Laura here is too. And we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive all about that. She's going to share some of the key insights that you can learn as a runner and some really important takeaways and how we can all, just work to fuel ourselves better. So thank you so much, Laura. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Steph. It's great to be here. I always love chatting with a fellow RD and a runner too. So great to chat with you today.
Yeah, wonderful. So let's start with some introductions. We'll let everyone get to know you a little bit better. So if you want to just, tell us your origin story, your background on your education, the work you do, any research that you've done.
Sure. So, let's see. I was born in, no, I'm only kidding. So I actually, I went to NYU. I know, I'm like, how far back do you want me to go? I'm actually a career changer, though. I think that's kind of a fun fact about me. But yeah, I worked in financial services and was not so happy there. So decided to pursue more of my passion. And I went back to school at NYU, where I did my dietetic coursework and I did my master's in clinical nutrition there. I was practicing in New York City in more of a boutique eating disorder practice, actually, but I always wanted to be a sports dietitian and I actually wanted to kind of marry the two worlds of sports nutrition and eating disorder work. So therein lies my area of expertise now and REDS too, which we'll talk more about kind of how do those all fit together, right? But I practiced in New York City for about 8 years, and then I met Dr. Catherine Ackerman, who is the medical director of our female athlete program in Boston, where I am now the lead dietitian there. But met Dr. Ackerman at a conference and basically told her I wanted to move to Boston and work with her because I really
Yeah.
wanted to hone my practice and even more on athletes with eating disorders. So not and REDS again. We'll come back to that. But yeah, that was what brought me to Boston was actually the work with the female athlete program at Boston Children's Hospital. So I am still the there's 4 sports RDs there now, which is very exciting. But yeah, I'm the head dietitian there. And I also I started my group practice here in Boston back in 2016. So I also run a group practice. We are a virtual practice, so we see people all over. But yeah, so I have 4 RDs, sports RDs on my team there. And yeah, so I am a very busy lady. I'm a mom. I've got 2 little ones. I'm a fellow runner. So looking forward to. I was just watching, out there spectating Boston last week, and I'm itching to get back out there. But running's more around my children these days. But I'm doing my
Yes.
rebuild.
Yes. I know that life. I know that life.
Yes, so I may have missed the end of that. I may have gotten off track there, but yes. What didn't I answer? Can I tell you anything else about me?
No, that's great. That's great. So that introduction was fantastic. Great
Sure.
to kind of get to know a
Yep.
little bit about you and your history. So next I want to talk about what exactly is REDS. We've kind of mentioned that term a couple of times. What is the definition of REDS?
Sure. So, what REDS is, or again, relative energy deficiency in sport. That is the full term, but we shorten it up to REDS for ease, right? Ease of talking. But it's basically what REDS is it's a syndrome of impaired physiological as well as psychological functioning caused by exposure to problematic low energy availability. So we might have a backup question off of that one for our listeners, I'm assuming.
Yes, absolutely. So can you describe problematic low energy availability?
I certainly can. That was a
Yeah.
nice kind of breadcrumbed our way to that one, right? So, yeah, so basically, what low energy availability is, it's this idea that if someone is expending a certain amount of energy and they're not taking in an adequate amount of nutrition to basically cover all of those expenditures, you end up in this state known as low energy availability, right? So your body doesn't have enough energy to cover what it needs in a day, right? Especially through exercise expenditures. So, and it does exist on a continuum. So the amount and the severity of a low energy availability, right? And the duration actually is a big focus of the latest REDS update, is this whole idea that low energy availability is a continuum, right? Because there's definitely people might experience a very short term impairment of energy availability for a myriad of reasons, but certainly those, and actually the paper is still, the research is still looking to define what exactly, what is problematic. Do we have like a cutoff for that? Because it's so different person to person, and the right, this is all part of the workup too. It's some of the challenges in assessing it, but basically someone who's in this on that far end of the continuum, where you might be in a more of a severe deficit in a more prolonged period of time, you start to notice physiological as well as, again, psychological impacts of that, and the severity of those can be linked again to the severity of the deficit and the length of time that someone has been living in it.
Absolutely. We've kind of talked about two different terms here. There's sort of two different things that we've mentioned: REDS and then low energy availability. What is the difference between those two things? I know when I'm talking to
Yep.
clients, and even here on the podcast when I'm talking about it, you use those two terms a little bit interchangeably, but they're not exactly the same thing, right? Like they are different. So what's the difference in the definition between REDS and
Hmm.
LEA?
Hmm. Sure, sure. And yeah, I think that's a really great and important clarifying point. And Steph, I can totally agree with that. I hear people, kind of mix them up all the time. And yeah, they're not the same thing. So basically, what low EA actually leads to those negative health and performance implications that are known as REDs. So basically, low EA is the cause of REDs, right? So they're not actually interchangeable. And if you look at those lovely, colorful diagrams that are in the most up to date paper, you will see that low EA is in the middle of a circle, right? It's like a wheel. We love that as athletes, right? With spokes around it, right? So basically, the low energy availability is what is causing the REDs, or the problematic low energy availability, I should say, to be proper in my
Yeah.
terminology.
Yes, yes. So when I was doing my education, when I was in university, we learned about something called the female athlete triad. Now, I don't want to say how many years later, but well over a decade later, we are now, talking about REDS. Like, in the work that you kind of the years that you've spent working in this area, how has our understanding of energy availability kind of going from the female athlete triad to REDS sort of
Mhm.
evolved?
Yeah, I mean that's such a great question. And I mean the first thing, it's funny as you're speaking, I'm thinking like it's kind of like blown the door off its hinges, right? Like I feel like it was this, 1992, I believe, was when the female athlete triad was introduced. And then in 2013, Reds came along, and initially, and then 2018 update, and now the fantastic new update of 2023. But it's so much more inclusive is kind of the number one thing I'm thinking of. And I mean, I think we both know where I'm going with this. I mean, the first thing being that this includes males, right? So, I think males were just for so long, it's like, were we ignoring the fact that males have hormones, right? Just because we're not tracking a menstrual cycle, right, doesn't mean that we don't see. I mean, I see plenty of male athletes with low testosterone, right? I mean, hello, that's a it's a major hormone. So I think that number one is kind of the number one thing, right? I think we're now looking at males, we're seeing males and saying, hey, you know what? Females aren't the only ones that can suffer from being in this energy deficit, right? Even the terminology is completely different, right? So, and I also think, again, and along that sort of same, vein of inclusivity, and just think about all the systems now, right? So I think that, again, we were before just looking at hormones, just looking at hormones in females, and just looking exclusively at bone health. So my hunch is that it's, and that the experience has been that often a lot of people were likely overlooked, right? Because sometimes we often see with females the menstrual irregularity or the oligomenorrhea, so the kind of irregular menstrual cycles can definitely, a lot of the time still is a symptom that we see for someone in reds. But I think the complicating factor with that too is the amount of individuals that are on birth control, that are on IUDs, and kind of that's a whole other discussion, right? But like kind of masking, because just I have to say this, and I'm sure you say this as well, but right, just if you're on the birth control pill and you're getting a period, quote unquote, it's sort of like it's an artificial period basically. So we don't actually know what's going on with the hormonal system. So I think when you were sort of just looking at bone health, just looking at menstrual function, you were missing all those spokes on the wheel. um so again, like, gee, I could go through all of them. Recovery, mental health, the hematological, gastrointestinal, sleep function, we've got urinary incontinence on there now. So there are so many other reasons someone might be coming in that is not amenorrhea, oligomenorrhea, but then we're putting all the pieces together and realizing, hey, this is a person that is in an energy deficit, but we just didn't have the language around it, right? And we didn't have the research. So a lot of differences, basically, to sum it up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think kind of thing. When somebody comes in and they're like not sleeping well, or they're having mental health struggles, or they're having digestive issues. So rarely, I think, especially with the digestive health and the mental health, so rarely would we initially think of this being conditions. We everything we're like it's a fueling problem. It's always a fueling problem.
Right.
But when people are
Hmm.
coming in and they're like, "Oh, my doctor told me I have IBS," and going through and you're listening to kind of their eating and their training, and maybe you also do have IBS, but let's fix your fueling first. Even though this person may not have any obvious hormonal irregularities to speak
Yep.
of, I think it's just something that no one would really kind of pinpoint, which makes it so important that, we're out here. You just wind up on that path of even more restriction sometimes.
Oh gosh, that's you said it. I totally, and I think you bring up a good point too that I want to mention. It's like this idea of like these differential diagnoses too, right? That like, you know, is there something else, that's something else going on here? And like I say, you took the words out of my mouth. Like I say to all my patients, like, yes, you might still have IBS, you might still have something else going on, but we don't know until we restore that energy balance in your
Yeah.
body, right? I literally had that conversation with a patient the other day. So we see eye to eye for that on that for sure, Steph.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We just make sure that anything else we're doing is built on a foundation of good nutrition and adequate nutrition. Because if we're, chasing after,
Right.
maybe it is a GI issue, or maybe
Mhm.
it's a nutrient deficiency, or, there's something else going on that we have to look at other issues. At the end of the day, some of that stuff may not be as effective if it's not built on a foundation, making sure that as a runner, you're eating well in your training demands. It's always worthwhile to make sure that you're just doing everything off that basis of fueling
Totally.
yourself well. So back to that 2023 IOC consensus statement, what are some of the kind of big key takeaways that you
Yeah.
found maybe most relevant, most exciting? And it doesn't have to be things that were like, new in this update from 2023, but even from, previous versions of
Okay.
that. But just so that people
Yeah.
know that if they are struggling or have questions about this stuff, there is actually really good resources out there that they can check out to get a little bit of
Yes.
insight.
Totally. Yeah. And then the paper's a good read. Like you don't have to be a scientist or a clinician, right? To read the paper too. There's a lot of really good charts and things like that in it too. But one of the biggest things that always comes to mind when people ask me, that question is, I really find it interesting the focus in this in actually this is part of the update. But the looking at not just the overall energy intake, but sort of
Yeah.
the breakdown of it, right? Because I feel like you'll appreciate this as well. People keep, you know, our society loves to hate on carbs, right?
Yeah.
But right, I just shake my head. But looking at really, even if someone's eating, let's say, adequate calories to support their energy output, if their carbohydrate availability is inadequate, that there were some studies that were showing that, hey, you can actually still be showing some signs and symptoms of reds with a low carbohydrate intake in the setting of adequate calories overall, right? So people on maybe higher fat or higher protein diets, if their carbohydrate intake is inadequate to support their needs, again, we could still be seeing some of those, some of that red symptomology occurring. So that I think, and I've been telling people that, I like say that like 1,000 times a day, I think. And also the connection with iron there, right? Inflammatory markers, right? So people hate carbs and they love to talk about inflammatory markers, right?
Yeah.
These are like all of our buzzwords, your interleukin 6, and it also showed, some of those studies were showing that, again, with that low carbohydrate intake, you're seeing an increase in some of those inflammatory markers. So yeah, again, I feel like you say inflammation to athletes and they're like, what do I do? Do I take out gluten? You're like, no, not unless you have celiac. But it's this idea then that people are also having issues with absorbing and storing adequate iron, right? And again, runners, iron. We love to talk about ferritin, right? So I
Yeah.
think that's one of my big things to point out. I also think the mental health, there's a bigger focus now on that as well. It was involved in the first one, right? But I do think it's important to point out, and again, this has been the case for all of the reds, the iterations of reds, but it is a double-sided arrow on the diagram, meaning that reds can be caused by psychological issues, right? Think about, like, if someone's anxious, depression, like a lot of times you undereat, right? I mean, it can go both ways. Some people struggle with kind of overeating, but it can definitely be an underfueling because of suppressed appetite, right? So it can cause it, but also if you're in an energy deficit, that can also lead to those health issues, excuse me, as well. So again, that double-sided arrow, and this is where we tie in like the eating disorder piece. Because reds and eating disorder are not synonymous either, right? So I think though that like high levels of anxiety, again, you can see them increased by being in a deficit already, or anxiety can cause a deficit. So I'll pause for a second there, but those are some of my, I would say, some of like my favorite quote unquote takeaways from thinking about reds.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I just wanted to ask, this is not a specifically consensus statement question, but also
Sure.
seeing some research. And I wanted to know if you had an update on this because I haven't heard anything about it since this one session that I was in. But actually looking at, issues of extremely
Sure.
high fiber eating, kind of interfering with that energy availability. Where, if you kind of look at like the macronutrient breakdown of someone's diet sort of
Mhm.
on paper,
Mhm.
they actually seem to have like a pretty good carbohydrate consumption. When you look a step further at the amount of fiber, or the amount of carbohydrates that are coming
Yep.
from specifically like some fruit, but like people who are eating huge quantities of
Yep.
vegetables, their carbohydrate intake can look pretty generous. But then you look at their fiber consumption, and we're
Yep.
looking at like, 80 plus grams of fiber per day.
Yep.
Also, I remember them mentioning there being some potentially negative impacts on menstruation
Mhm.
because of the
Yep.
high fiber consumption. Do you have an update on that? Is that still a thing, or was that just sort of a flash in the pan in terms of like one research study?
No, I wonder if you and I saw the same one, Steph, because I also saw a study, and now you've given me a homework assignment for the day, but this is something. I mean, I agree with exactly what you're saying, and I did also read a study that talked about like a sex hormone binding. And
Yeah.
again, I haven't seen probably the same paper,
Yeah.
right? This was a few years ago though, so I'm gonna have to my next female athlete program research meeting. We've got some of the big wigs in there, so might have to run it by my buddy Trent Stellingworth and ask him what he's seeing out there. But I mean, and if there isn't more, there definitely should.
Sounds good. Can't wait for an update.
Oh, you got it. I will stay tuned, right? Because I see the same thing, right? And I've had people, until you take that deeper dive, you're like, oh wow, yeah, this fiber content, especially for people that need high calories, right? High calorie demands. So I actually sometimes have my athletes going on some lower fiber carbohydrates as well. Like I might have them specifically eat like white rice, or I know people are like gasping listening to, oh my gosh, wait, what? But those lower fiber carbohydrates to help them meet their needs without having that digestive distress or
Yeah.
that kind of fullness feeling, right? Because we know what fiber does for us, right? It makes you feel full. So it could sometimes be hard for them to get their quantity of nutrition in as a result of a high fiber diet, right? But yes, let's you and I are gonna loop back on that one to see if anybody else has looked closer at that because I think we saw the same paper.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I have, it was I thought it was so great to bring that sort of to attention because I can think of a few people over the
Mhm.
years that I've worked with who your carbohydrate intake is actually not that impressive
Mhm.
when we remove that, 80 or 100 grams of fiber that you're taking in, but
Right.
then also is there,
Right.
potentially further impacts, not just the carbohydrate availability, but the actual fiber is having an impact on absorption and digestion. So
Hey, our clinical
anyway,
findings, right? That's
yeah.
great. Yep.
Absolutely. So we were talking about some of those key takeaways from the IOC, the 2023 consensus statement. And was there anything else in there that you thought was really kind of meaningful or really good takeaways from this iteration of the paper?
Mhm. Mhm. I also think that the reduced skeletal muscle functioning, especially like thinking about implications for reduced like muscle synthesis and seeing an impact on an individual's ability to store glycogen. I'm actually going through this with a current patient, and this person was in quite in low energy availability for problematic low energy availability for a good amount of time, and we're still seeing now, even though she is increasing her intake and really, one might look at her intake and output right now and
Hmm.
say, oh great, you're out of quote unquote out of reds now, right? You're out of this deficit, but still seeing an impact when she's getting into a longer workout or that heart rate is getting to those higher heart rate zones. She's bonking even if she's eating an adequate diet. So I do think that idea of the impact on your
Hmm.
ability to store and utilize glycogen, that's been a really interesting one for me too, and seeing as people are going through their recovery, that even if they're kind of, again, back in sort of that balance, there's a lot of things I think that we sort of, even in the labs, like linger. Sometimes that like T3, suppressed T3, so those thyroid hormones can stay, it can be increasing, but it's sort of like chugging along, even though someone might be back. Like the numbers might, that's why, the numbers might look good. But I think that something to always consider is what I say to everybody is this workup is truly an art and a science. You cannot get so dialed in on the numbers and the grams and the ounces and the this and that, that you're not listening to the person in front of you, because it's still, I mean, this is still new. There's still a ton of research, right? There were over 170 research studies done after Reds came out, and they're still coming out because there's still things we don't know, right? So listen to who's in front of you, right? And if there's something, as a listener, you're experiencing something and you're like, I don't know, does this fit in here? Does this mean anything? Like, bring it up to your doctor. And I have patients do that all the time. They'll be like, I don't know if this is helpful for you. And I'm like, tell me everything.
Yeah. And there's no such thing as TMI. This is all I do all day, every day. You would think we would spend more time talking about food,
I literally just say the same
but we
thing.
spend a surprising amount of time talking about what comes out the other end.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, we do.
Yes, we might be totally going off the rails in terms of speculation with this one, but that's fine as long as people know that we're just speculating.
Yes,
um,
exactly.
in terms of that skeletal muscle dysfunction and issues with glycogen storage when someone does start repleting their fueling, and I mean, you said an excellent point there about that's the difficulty with just having numbers. Like people come to us and they just want us to tell them like how much to eat, like how much do I need, how much should I be
Mhm,
getting, how do I just
mhm.
fix this with a meal plan basically. And unfortunately it goes so much deeper than that. It also can have a really hard time with seeing weight gain when they are repleting their fuel. Like when they're eating more, they're still training quite a bit, but as soon as they're eating more, they're seeing like an increase in weight. Is it storing glycogen? So then of course those
Mhm.
calories are maybe being stored as body fat.
I think that my belief and my, kind of what I'm writing. I mean, that's an interesting thought though, for sure. And hey, is there something to that? Maybe there is, right? Again, we're still learning because we do see a lot of
Yeah.
the time when people are renourishing, waking, and that is a very uncomfortable hurdle for a lot of people,
Hmm.
right? It's not, I mean, it's a complex one. I feel like you and I can have a very long discussion on this, but
Yeah.
I think a lot of times too, depending on how long someone has been in an energy suppressed state, right? What do we know? We know that the body is going to into a bit of a suppression mode, right? Or a low, or as I call it, a low power mode. Think about your cell phone, right? Without when it's on low juice, right? I always use that one. That's my favorite example. But basically, you're getting this suppressed metabolic rate, and that's what's causing all of these symptoms, or these systems rather, to kind of go into quote unquote hibernation or starvation, right? So a lot of times what we're seeing is because those metabolic rates are slowing down so much, given how much time someone sits in that state, um, we see those negative impacts on the metabolism. And my question is, okay, how long does it take a body to get out of that state, right? Is that metabolism, right? Are we storing? So this comes back to your point, right? Exactly. Like what do we know when someone's in a starvation state, right? You're breaking down body tissue, you're storing energy as fat, right? So yeah, so we're definitely saying the same thing. We're kind of coming at it from these different angles and meeting in the middle here. So yeah, I mean, I think this is one of my biggest questions too. Like, how long does it take to have the metabolism respond, right? And the other flip side of that, which is a whole other discussion too, is like, has someone been in, perhaps the body size, weight, or shape that they've been in has not been an appropriate one for them, right? Has someone also been sitting at a place that is not their actual body type, right? Like a lot of times, if we have an athlete even in their 20s, we'll go back to growth charts, and I'll look at where someone trended, right? Well, I will use them. I won't use it typically for someone in like their 40s, right? But I think that it can be really telling if you're working with someone that's maybe kind of struggled with being in an energy deficit since high school, and they're in their 40s or 50s now. The metabolism might not sort of, I always say, quote unquote, snap back as quickly, or, it could be that this person does experience a bit more weight gain. But again, is there a point where that metabolism kind of gets back on board? You would think, right? With
Hmm.
training
Hmm.
again and getting back in an energy balance and building muscle, that should increase the resting metabolic rate. Um, but I think this is another thing with REDS and REDS recovery that is like, I think we're in the middle of it, right? And we're seeing this a lot. I'm sure you're seeing it as well with your patients. But I get a lot of people with this question, like, why is this happening? And I do think a lot of it has to do with kind of the effects on the metabolism, how long someone's been there, and how their body's recovering from it. And their age. I do think age really does have an impact here too, just anecdotally or clinically.
Yeah, such an evolution. And I love that we can just say, like, hey, we don't know. We're still evolving. Hopefully, one day we'll have an answer and we'll get there. So, if someone's thinking that a lot of stuff that we're talking about today is hitting home for them, like if they think they might be energy availability or they're seeing
Mhm.
symptoms of REDS, what is your recommendation? What would the next steps be? What should they do?
Yeah, I mean, there's more and more physicians kind of getting comfortable in doing the REDS workup. I'm kind of biased. I work with the Beyonce of REDS, if you will, Dr. Kate Ackerman. Someone once called her the Beyonce of sports medicine, and that was just fantastic. So yeah, I mean, if you are in the or you're willing to come to the Boston area, once someone establishes as a patient in person, Dr. Ackerman, I believe in most states, can continue to see someone regularly. But there are also physicians out in, I know there's a program, our Stanford, Dr. Emily Krause out in California. They're actually our kind of Western gateway, if you will. So we work a lot through the WUSI Performance Alliance and Children's Hospital in Stanford. So there's a connection between our programs. And there's a new program in Kansas City that
Mhm.
is also doing REDS workups at this point. So I know those are obviously like very specific locations, right? If someone's like, I am nowhere near any of those, what do I do? I mean, I think Project Reds is also another good, that's another great group that's putting out some really good information too. I would even say like we have a female athlete conference website that has a lot of our publications. It has links to honestly a lot of the like just for gaining more knowledge for yourself instead of like the clinical workup piece. There is a link to a lot of like the publications, the research, the podcast. This one will be on there, like all the things that our team has done. So that can be a good place just to continue to educate yourself. Dr. Melissa Lodge has an amazing podcast too. She's one of our collaborators too, and it's the Fed Collaborative, and she's got a great account with a lot of really good information on it as well. But yeah, I mean, I think, and everyone should definitely come to the Female Athlete Conference.
Mm.
Sorry, a little tiny little plug for that next summer in Boston. Woo, Steph, you should be there. It'd be great to meet you in person.
Yeah.
It's like a big party. It's great. But I do think, like, again, more and more physicians are becoming more, are getting more well versed. And again, because of groups such as ours, I swear I'm not just like pumping us up for the fun of it. Like, but our group has really been Dr. Ackerman's kind of vision has been, we were the first of our kind, right? And so our goal with our conference has been to educate clinicians around the country and have people come and learn how to do the REDS workup. But that REDS paper too, I mean, it really is meant to help a physician also say, like, these are, the differential diagnoses. So kind of actually it's a tool for a lot of people. But yeah, if you're wondering how do you get connected with someone and you're like, I can't go to Boston, they can certainly reach out. Again, our program is happy to help give names of people if you're not able to come to us, like we do know. So the female athlete program at Boston Children's Hospital, who doesn't just see children. Wow, I just said children's. Who doesn't? We don't just see children. We see plenty of adults. So you can always reach out or go to our website and send us an inquiry, and we can try and also help you find local support if we know of it.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. And so, any final thoughts or pieces of advice or anything that you want to share to the runners that are listening
Mm,
today?
yeah, yeah. Well, I think you said it, Steph. I'm actually just I'm gonna highlight something you said because it's one of my favorite things. If you think of like your nutrition as a pyramid, no, not the food guide pyramid. That's not what we're talking about here. But this idea that the base of a pyramid is enough food, right? I'm sure you see this too with your athletes. Like, people like to get caught up in the weeds of all the stuff towards the top of the pyramid, like, all the nitty-gritty stuff, right? But I'm like, you know what? We're not talking about that until we make sure you're eating enough food, right? So enough, and then let us work with you on the balance. Because actually, even like the macro balance is not the number one thing, right? And let us worry about that. But making sure you're getting an adequate balance, that's what's going to help us establish and be able to work up that pyramid to all of those like more sort of niche and nuance aspects of nutrition. But you got to get the base of the pyramid first. So there's nothing else, right? So enough is enough, right? That's enough is enough. Maybe we need to do something with that. I don't know. But yeah, that's so I'm going to highlight what you said. I agree with that. Yep.
I love that. I love that. Such great advice. And so, you mentioned already
Thank you.
where people can connect with your team and find you and get some more resources.
Yeah, and I'm gonna just double check my thing to make sure I'm not my Instagram, make sure I'm not missing anybody. But no, it is
Yep.
Female Athlete Program and Female Athlete Conference. We actually have two. The Stanford Faster platform is a good one. That's through Emily Krause and her team, but that's another really good one. Yeah, those I would say those are a few of my favorite. And I already mentioned Melissa Lodge's as well. The Fed Collaborative is another really good one. And yeah, you can follow. I have one through my practice, Laura Moretti Nutrition. So those are some, but the biggies, I would definitely follow our female athlete program and conference.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you sharing your thoughts on all things REDS and making sure that we can help more runners stay out of a state of problematic low energy availability. And I really, really appreciate you taking the time out of what I'm sure is a very busy schedule to be here and to share all of your wonderful knowledge with us. So thank you so much. And for everyone listening, out all of the great resources that she mentioned, check out that IOC consensus statement paper if you're up for a little bedtime reading. And if you think that you are struggling with low energy availability, or if you are seeing symptoms of REDS coming out in your day-to-day life or with your training, then definitely get help with it. Don't wait, don't sit on it, don't let them go. Take action, do something about it. And that first step might be just as simple as connecting with your physician. And of course, all of us dietitians are always excited to be here and to help you learn how to feel better so that you can perform better and just feel better in your everyday life. Like, just to be able to achieve the things that you want to achieve is so wonderful. So thank you again, Laura, and we'll catch you. The information on this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not to be used or relied upon for the diagnosis or treatment of any health condition. This information does not create a client-practitioner relationship and should not be used as a substitute for professional medical advice.